Let's do it. Welcome into Inside Carolina's Postgame podcast, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. I'm Tommy Ashley. That is Justin Jackson of Shooting It Straight fame, normally on Monday nights with John Bowman. Justin, I said it before we went on air, I'm exhausted. Just watching that game has literally exhausted me. Let's get your opening thoughts, and then we'll dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a few different takeaways. That game goes from thinking it's going to be a 25-point blowout to North Carolina might make this unbelievable comeback, and they've showed some fight that I didn't think they had. I think it was interesting to see the differences in halves from the standpoint of the physicality. The first half, Kansas, they was just dominated North Carolina on really both sides of the ball. And then the second half, you had contributions from pretty much everybody, but just the intensity level and the physicality, I think, was so much different in the second half. And it's funny, he finished with 20 and 10, but Hunter Dickinson didn't necessarily have the type of game that I think, probably a lot of people thought he would against, the bigs that North Carolina has this year. So overall, I was kind of saying this before the game. I think it's kind of a win-win situation for North Carolina, just from the standpoint of having this kind of game and that kind of atmosphere, that kind of intensity. That had a game of like an NCAA tournament Final Four type feel, and it's the second game of the season. And so obviously you hate to lose, you want to win every game, but for them to be able to go in here and have the chance to win at the end of the game, it just gives them more learning opportunities going forward. So overall, hate to see the loss, but I think there's some really good things that you can take away from this game.
Yeah, let's dig into it a little bit. Obviously Seth Trimble, he looked shook early, and then he ends up coming on and finishes with 19, 10 of 10 from the line. RJ, we'll talk about RJ a little bit. He didn't have his best night, 3 for 15 from the field, 1 for 7 from 3, and you hate to see that in a 3-point game. But Justin, you've played in tough environments, and I agree with you when you talk about this as a Final Four. It felt like the national championship game watching it. Now, being in the building in New Orleans versus watching on TV is a lot different, but it felt like that type of an atmosphere, and it's November the 8th, folks, which is ridiculous. But sort of talk about sort of getting your footing early in an environment like that. People forget or seem to forget Kansas, number one team in the nation. They've spent Lord knows how much money on that roster. They've got the best players from like multiple teams, plus KJ Adams, plus Dickinson, and it's just a great basketball team. But the environment and getting your footing, if you're Carolina, it's one thing to play at Duke, where you're familiar. It's another thing to play, at some of the ACC venues. But going into a venue like that, what's it like when you just really haven't experienced something like that early in a game? Because Kansas jumped all over Carolina early in the second half, or in the mid-port in the first half. It looked like it was going to be ugly.
Yeah. I kind of equate this to my junior year when we went into Indiana. The experience of that was, I will always say that that's the hardest arena I've ever played in. It's the loudest arena. The floor felt like it was shaking. You can't really think. You can't hear your own thoughts, it feels like. And that was me as a junior already playing 2 years prior to that and going to the national championship the year before. And you go into a game like this where you've got, we've talked about it all preseason. You've got so many new players, whether it's freshmen or transfers that have never played in the Dean Dome, let alone gone into Allen Fieldhouse and played against the number one team. And as much as you want to say that guys have to be ready to play, nerves play a factor. It's just how it works. So you go into here, you've got RJ, who obviously I think we can talk about him a little bit as far as just the struggles. He's shown and proven, that this isn't like him. And it was just an off game, and that happens. But you have guys in the first half just trying to kind of figure it out as it goes. And then you have a Kansas team who they were hitting a bunch of shots. They had all of the momentum from the crowd. But I think the most impressive part was how they were able to kind of figure it out at halftime and change that around. But going back to the environment, I mean, you can't get ready for an environment like this uh, by doing anything in practice. You can't have, uh, GAs on the sideline clapping. You can't have music playing. Like, there's nothing that can really get you ready for this type of game other than getting into it and kind of getting your feet wet. So I think that's kind of what you saw. And then they kind of settled in kind of towards the end of the first half and then kind of started rolling a little bit in the second.
Yeah, you look at the difference in the halves. Carolina, of course, down 15 in the first half, shot 35%. Kansas shot almost 60, and then it basically flips in the second half. And if you look at the box score, the same thing: 53-38 first half, 51-39 Carolina in the second half. Let's sort of talk about. We're talking with Justin Jackson on the Inside Carolina post-game. Shout out to the almost 400 people are in here. Let's see if we can get it up to 500 or 600. I estimated if Carolina had somehow won that game, there'd be over 1,000. So
Probably so.
let's push it. We had almost 800 for a Memphis exhibition game. So let's go from there. But let's talk about RJ a little bit. He sort of played to me, and this is something that you're familiar with. He sort of played to me like he had the weight of the team on him, and I tweeted it during the game. He didn't, because his teammates, even when he was struggling, got him in position to take the lead, to have that opportunity, and RJ just couldn't really get off the start. What's that like as a guy? You're a shooter, as a guy that makes shots consistently and struggles. I mean, it's got to get in your head a little bit. I don't care what they say. It's got to get in that head, especially late. And you saw him in the lane. He sort of missed a shot, and he kind of just,
Mhm.
did that. Walk us through what you think RJ was feeling during this entire game.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you even saw it in the Elon game. I think the tough part about what he did last year was it was so historic, and there was so many things records that he broke, um, accolades that he accomplished. That coming back this year, people kind of put the bar so high as far as if he doesn't do what he did last year, then it's a failure, right? And so as a player, you think about that way more than you might want to admit. Like I'll go all the way back to my junior year whenever it was up in the air who was going to get ACC Player of the Year. It was between me and Luke Kennard, and the probably week or two before the announcement of the award, I've never really had that kind of weight and mental kind of just funk that I was in the entire time, whether it was in game, in practice, whatever it was. It's just a pressure that is kind of just put on you and you put on yourself. And I think that's kind of what I've seen in these first two games. It's basketball, so there's going to be off games. It's unfortunate to see in this magnitude of a game and this intensity of a game for him to kind of have that struggle. Um, but at the end of the day, bad games happen. But I think for him, it's a matter of realizing, hey, look, me just playing freely and playing how I play all the time is what has gotten me to this point. And this year, it looks like I've got way more supporting cast to be able to help us as a team to get where we need to get. And it's obviously a balance, but I think if he can get to that point and be comfortable with just being RJ Davis and not being preseason first team All American and preseason ACC Player of the Year again, and all of these sort of things, I think we'll start to kind of see things kind of start to flow better for him, as opposed to kind of having that pressure that he's either put on himself or other people are kind of putting on him and he's thinking about it a little too much.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, 3 for 15, like I mentioned earlier, 1 for 7. That is not a winning formula for Carolina. But I think what RJ learns from this game is that, hey, if I can just go 5 for 15, we win.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not much difference. Seth Trimble's a guy, I said earlier, I thought he looked a little shook early. He comes through and makes plays. Justin, this is a guy that hadn't really been relied on for North Carolina for a long time. And now he's one of those three. I think Carolina's probably got, I don't know if it's the best backcourt or the best three in the country, but it's up there.
Mhm.
And they have to perform. What did you see from Seth Trimble about the way he sort of stepped up, stayed aggressive, made his free throws? I mean, the growth there is significant. And now we're not talking about a Memphis preseason game. We're talking about Kansas and
Yeah.
Lawrence, and he performed.
Yeah, I mean, I think people forget how highly touted he was coming out of high school. Um, Seth was big time, USA team, all sorts of accolades in high school. That's still within Seth, right? Like you get to college and your role starts to change a little bit. You got to find your niche. You got to figure out how you'll be used within the team, where you can be aggressive, things like that. But now you give this guy an opportunity, and I always say confidence is a crazy drug. You get a little bit of confidence and you start to see the work that you've put in, and now that the teammates and the coaches have the confidence in you. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing, is that Seth is now not looking back towards the roles that he played the past few years. I think now this is kind of the role that he's flying right into, and he's not second guessing it at all. So I think one thing about Seth is he's relentless at getting to the paint. And for this team, when it comes to size being kind of the biggest question mark, and, how are we going to get rim pressure and attack to the paint, I think that's his calling card. And that's going to be probably one of the biggest things for this team throughout the season. And I mean, obviously, you shoot 10 free throws in a game. You're doing nothing but attacking. And I think
Mhm.
that's kind of what he's doing. He's really just playing to his strength. Now, when it comes to shooting, obviously, if you're open, you got to shoot it. Hopefully, you knock it down. But I think one thing that players sometimes kind of fall into is trying to prove people wrong that they can do something different. Right. And I think with Seth, all you're seeing is him just attacking. And in transition, he's getting downhill and backdoor cuts, getting on the glass. Everything that is his strength is what he is just kind of falling into. And I think that's going to be big for him and this team as the season goes on.
Absolutely. And then Elliot Cadeau, the third member of that backcourt, uh, he continues to grow, and he continues to make plays. He's got some fouls that he probably could get away from committing, but he's all in it. I thought that shot was in at the end. I admit, I was like, "That's in," like OT, and but just sort of speak to the growth you've seen from him. And then when we come back, after you finish, I want to talk about the rebounding, because there's a stat in rebounding and folks hadn't seen that I got to highlight. But Cadeau's performance, Justin.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think the growth is just, I don't know if people necessarily realize how much work is put in the off season. I mean, nowadays it's a little bit different. Guys can travel and go train at certain places and things like that in the off season. But I mean, it's every single day, getting up in the morning, lifting, doing some sort of skill workout, coming back, playing pickup, or doing more skill workout. And then once practices start, then you're practicing. So for me, it was always the confidence of knowing the work that I had put in would translate. And I think a lot of what you're seeing from the growth of guys like Elliot is the work that they've put in. I obviously know that there's guys like Marcus, guys like Sean, guys like some of these assistant coaches that are really putting in time to develop these players. And you're starting to see it in guys like Elliot and Seth. So I think it's just a testament to the work that he's put in. Now, obviously, the confidence that he's having and kind of seeing how things can really start to translate into the games. And um, we always talk about his playmaking ability, but there's still so many things that Elliott can do on the floor just outside of that. And I agree. I thought that shot, as crazy as that last possession was, I thought that shot was down as well. And so, I think it's going to be fun to watch. I mean, at the end of the day, he's basically a true freshman this year.
Mhm.
Last year he was supposed to be a senior in high school, and now, he's already got 1 year under his belt, and I think we're just kind of seeing that growth and that maturity even more kind of in this start of this season.
Yeah, we're talking with Justin Jackson on Inside Carolina Postgame. Probably go a little bit longer than we normally do on these because there's 539 people currently in here, and it keeps going up. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Email Matt at congruityhr.com for your free assessment. Justin, the stat, I think I heard Billis or one of them said early, Carolina was getting killed on the boards. I think it was 11-5 early, and it looked 11-5 early. I mean, I've never been a fan of Hunter Dickinson. I don't think he's great. If you let him get his spot, he's going to score or get fouled. But if he can't get there, he's not much. I said before the game that KJ Adams was going to be a problem, and he certainly played that role early. But when you look at the rebounding at the end of the game, if I told you Carolina just out rebounded Kansas, what would you have said?
There's no way.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, I mean, and that's kind of been the biggest question mark is how are they going to do against a team that has real size and real athleticism? And I think kind of going to the KJ Adams, that was kind of my thought process going into the game too. Like, can North Carolina really match the energy and the level of intensity that he plays with? And you look at the stat sheet, he had 14 points, but they held him to 2 rebounds, which usually that's where he makes basically the biggest impact of the game is offensive rebounding and getting rebounds on the defensive end and taking it out and getting on transition and things like that. So I think that's like we talk about the difference in how the game started to how the game ended. Is I think obviously hindsight is 2020, but if North Carolina is able to play anywhere close to consistent the way that they played in that second half, I think this team, I mean, can make a really, really long run in the tournament.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat said Dickinson controlled the game. He had 20 and 10. I don't think he was. Well, maybe he was the difference. I don't know. I just don't. I've never I've never really been a huge fan of him. But you can't. Look, you got to get props for 20 and 10. But to your point, and we can sort of move towards the end of this one. I said before we went on air, and I think you agree. In this game, in this 40 minutes of basketball on November the 8th, the second game of the season, I think Carolina showed what they can be, and Carolina also showed what they can be. And I think that pretty much sums it up, Justin. If you look at the first half and the second half, this team can be either or. Overall, final thoughts here as we talk about that. We haven't even mentioned just Withers. I mean, I said before the season I thought Cade Tyson would be the difference maker, whether they were good or bad. Maybe it's Withers because Cade Tyson, we don't need to even go there. I mean, the guy struggled, and he looked like he didn't belong on the court, quite frankly. And that's not to say it'll be that way all year, but Withers showed us more than we've seen since he got to Carolina, but in spurts and on the biggest thing. So Carolina can be this in the first half. Carolina can be that in the second half, Justin. Sort of makes sense for us that we just watch while you guys actually played the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's crazy because you don't really realize how basketball is really just a collection of moments, right? And obviously those moments can be a lot louder than others, and things can kind of add up, and that's kind of what we saw in the first half of those moments that Kansas was having was just piling on, and North Carolina wasn't able to kind of change and take over and have their own moments. Now you look into the second half, all of a sudden North Carolina swings it back, and I mean, I think for me watching the basketball game and being like detail oriented, seeing the way that they were scoring offensively and able to get into the paint and get certain shots down the stretch to really make that run and take the lead. As great as Withers was, there was him and Jalen Washington at the end of the game. Those particular moments when it comes to the corner three that Jalen Washington shot at the end of the game, those add up, right? I think it felt like the last 4 or 5 possessions, North Carolina was scoring at the rim every single time. And that's how they were able to take over the lead. Now all of a sudden, we take a jump shot from the outside, or we have miscommunication and throw the ball back court and give Kansas the ball back at certain times. Um, and it's just, I think these kind of games, you realize how important those what seem like small moments can really add up to be. Now, with that being said, Withers, I think that's the best game that I've seen him play since coming to North Carolina. Um, and the plays that he made on both ends of the floor while playing undersized at times, and having to guard down low against Dickinson, and also offensively being able to stretch the floor and knock down shots and then get downhill and finish, which I thought should have been an and one, but finishing at the rim. That was huge for this team, and they're going to need him to continue to play like that. I was impressed with Jalen Washington and how physical he actually did play down low. Even though Hunter still had 20 and 10, it was a tough 20 and 10. It felt like it wasn't just him getting the ball, and it was he was just putting everybody in the rim. I think a lot of what he was scoring off of was just really good ATOs and good plays ran, and it wasn't necessarily just him dominating the player that was guarding him. So I was impressed with those two guys, and I think it's going to continue to be a question going throughout this season, but that was kind of the biggest question mark going into the game. Who's going to step up for that? And then you throw a guy like Vin Allen, who also had some really good minutes, and gave some really good play down low and getting on the boards and finishing, second chance points and things like that. So I think when I look at this game, there was just a few things and a few moments that maybe if they changed and were a little different, maybe the outcome is a little different as well. But to come back down 20 and have a chance to win at the end of the game, we're going to be looking back on this game come ACC play, ACC tournament, NCAA tournament. We're going to say that game right there was huge for the development and kind of the learning experience for this team.
Yeah, across the board. I mean, Drake Powell, Ian Jackson, they were not phased in that environment, did not look to me. You mentioned Vin Allen Lubin. He looked lost at the beginning, came back and made some plays. Ty Claude, he struggled. Cade Tyson struggled. But overall, Carolina's going to need RJ to make shots against elite teams. That's just going to be a fact of the matter. And if you look at the schedule's full of elite basketball teams sprinkled throughout, including a couple in the ACC. Last question, and I'll let you get out of here because you mentioned it before we started recording. Carolina, 0 points in the last 2 of 3. From your basketball eye, the root cause of that, it seemed like they couldn't get settled when it really mattered in Kansas with that experience and that gold-plated roster that they have was able to execute. How difficult is that for you as a former guy that sort of your teams sort of prided themselves on executing down the stretch, especially you look in the national championship run. I mean, when you're watching that, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. Like you say, when I was at school and Coach Williams was there, it was always a debate of at the end of the game, should we call a timeout? Should we not call a timeout? Should we do certain things to get everybody settled? I think me personally, with 12 seconds left, I would have loved to see a timeout and maybe get a good ATO drawn up, and the outcome might have still been the same exact thing. But I think in that situation, just being able to draw up a play and really get the ball, I don't think at the end of the game that your best player and preseason ACC player of the year and first team All-American shouldn't at least be involved in some sort of action. He might be the decoy. He might be the guy getting the ball. Even with a game where he's struggling, I think he still has to be involved in some way. So me personally, I would have loved to see a timeout. But like I said, we won a lot of games not calling timeouts and just going and playing. And at times, my junior year, there was times when I wasn't involved in those plays and we still won. So it's always hindsight 2020. I was just watching the Baltimore Ravens and Cincinnati Bengals game yesterday, and seeing them go for 2 at the end of the game and not getting it, you can always look back and say, why'd you not just kick the field goal and give yourself a chance? So looking back, it's always easy to say, well, yeah, we should have called a timeout or whatever. But Um, I think going back to the whole 2 minutes of not scoring, I think that's a matter of just leadership on the floor. I think that's where a guy like Elliot, a guy like RJ, even a guy like Seth, and those guards that, like we said, are some of the best in the country, have to kind of get the team settled and get back to kind of what got them to that point. Like I said, they were getting into the paint, it felt like, at will, whether that was in certain actions of pick and rolls or dribble handoffs or whatever it was. There for a while, it was as if Kansas couldn't stop them or slow them down at all. So, hey, let's get back into that kind of action and get kind of settled. And then, like I said, the outcome might still be the same, but at least you were doing exactly what it was that got you to where you were at that point in the game. So, like I said, me personally, I would have loved to see a timeout. But at the end of the day, I'm an HD fan and I'm an HD supporter. So, whatever he decides to do, then hey, more power to him. And who knows? Like you said, it's a learning experience for everybody: players, coaches, parents, fans. Like it's a learning experience for everybody. So, um, I love it. I love seeing these kind of games early on, and as a fan, obviously, it's fun to watch. But uh, it's going to be fun to kind of see just the transition and the maturity as the season um, really gets going, and how this game affects that.
Yeah, in case you forgot what makes college basketball great, awesome, all that stuff, rewind the tape, watch this one over again. Carolina gets up off the mat, comes all the way back, takes the lead, almost gets a win, which would have been one for the ages in Phog Allen Field or in the Phog in Lawrence, Kansas, and loses by 3 ultimately. Elliot Cadeau's 3 does not go down. Justin Jackson, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Looking forward to shooting it straight next week early. Carolina's basketball season in full swing. We'll be back with plenty more content as it goes, but you've been listening to the post game sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Thanks, Justin. Thanks to the almost 700 folks that decided to spend your Friday night with us. We'll see you next time.